Hello, I'm Dr. DeBellis, and today we're going to talk about a special type of cell called the neuron. The neuron is special because it can actually transmit a message. It does this through an action potential. Before we get into the details of how an action potential occurs, though, I'd like to start by laying down some ground terminology to help us to better understand how this happens. So this is a neuron. This is what a neuron looks like. Information is going to travel in that direction. Now, this part of the neuron here, this arborized part, is called the dendrites. The dendrites receive incoming information. We're going to find out that there's actually a barrage of neurotransmitters that stimulate. They actually hit the dendrites. Oftentimes they hit them in these little areas here. These little outpouchings are called dendritic spines. And dendritic spines basically increase the surface area of the neuron for incoming information. The dendritic spines are constantly changing their number and their shape. They can do that in as short as a few seconds, and that actually allows us to give way to this complex phenomenon we're going to call neuroplasticity. So when neurotransmitters hit these dendritic spines, oftentimes it will lead to a change in electrostatic pressure, little tiny changes, and those make their way in this direction again. Flow of information is going to be in that direction. And it makes its way over here to what we're going to call the soma. The soma is also called the cell body. And the soma contains the nucleolus and all the different organelles that you usually find in any kind of cell, such as the ribosomes, the endoplasmic reticulum, the mitochondria. So whenever there's enough change in the polarity of the cell, it's actually going to cause what we're going to call an action potential. An action potential is kind of like a domino effect. It's going to start here. We call this spot the axon hillock. At that point, if there's not enough of a change, it will actually initiate this action potential. And again, the action potential is going to travel in this direction, sort of like a domino effect. Now we call this part of the neuron here the axon. And the axon is covered with myelin. And in between this myelin, we have the nodes of Ranvier. Myelin insulates the neuron. And by insulating it, it actually increases the strength of the action potential as well as the speed of the action potential. It travels from here all the way to the end. And we're going to call these the axon terminals. And at the axon terminals, and again, the axon terminal is where the action potential is actually going to exit. It's going to do that through the release of a neurotransmitter into the synapse. But if we want to look at the neuron from a functional standpoint, we can say this is the input zone, the dendrites and the dendritic spines. The axon hillock, the cell body, and the axon hillock are going to be called the integration zone because that's where the computation of whether there's enough of a change in electrostatic pressure to induce the action potential occurs. So this is going to be integration zone, and this is the conduction zone. It's the area where the action potential is actually conducted from the axon hillock all the way to the axon terminals. And then finally, we have the axon terminals, which are going to be the output zone. And at the axon terminals, that's where we find the release of neurotransmitter into the synapse. And then the neurotransmitter travels across the synapse and it hits dendritic spines of the postsynaptic neuron. But these are the major landmarks that give way to this phenomenon. Now we're going to talk about them in more detail and exactly how they work.